In this video, we'll examine the course of the trial of the Templars. In Part 4, we already looked at why the charges against the Templars were false. However, Philip IV's interrogators were not interested in the evidence, and ignored the Templars when they insisted on their innocence. Instead, they tortured them until they either confessed or died from torture. An anonymous medieval writer tells us that those whom the investigators have killed in torture they secretly bury in the stable or in the garden, out of fear that such horrible and savage deeds should reach royal ears, since they tell the king that the aforesaid brothers did not confess their crimes by violence, but by their own accord. Historians have long noted that Philip's interrogators were lying to the king about exactly how the inquiries were conducted. They told Philip that the Templars were voluntarily confessing, not under the pain of torture. To what extent Philip understood what was actually going on is debatable. Some scholars believe that Philip earnestly believed the charges. Others are convinced that he knew well that the trial was a sham. In November 1309, Ponant de Gizy, commander of Payerne, testified before papal commissioners about his experience at the hands of the French administration. He was asked whether he had ever been tortured, and he replied that he had. 3 months before his confession, made in the presence of the Lord Bishop of Paris, his hands tied behind his back so tightly that the blood ran down to his fingernails, in a certain pit, in which he could only take 1 pace, protesting and saying that if he was put to the torture again, he would deny everything that he had said now, and say whatever he was told to say. For a short time, he had been prepared to have his head cut off, or to suffer fire or boiling for the honor of the said order. But now that he had suffered imprisonment for the past 2 years, he was not able to bear such long tortures as he had already been in. So the Templars confessed because of fear of torture, and to make the torture stop. Pope Clement V was enraged when Philip had the Templars arrested without his approval. However, the dawn of the 14th century was a time of much less power for the Pope than the early 13th century. Clement, under pressure from the French king, authorized the arrest and investigation of the Templars, sending a letter to all the kings of Christendom, ordering them to carry out the trial. Most Christian monarchs still looked favorably on the Templars, and so did not comply with the Pope's demand, either partially or at all. Torture occurred virtually nowhere outside France, and most of the Templars were incorporated into new military orders, especially in Spain, where the Templars were so numerous. It is noteworthy that outside of France, none of the brothers admitted to the charges. Pope Clement finally demanded that the case in France be turned over to the church authorities. It was at this point that Jacques de Molay and other high-ranking Templars recanted their forced confessions. Philip now began a propaganda campaign in an effort to sway public opinion against the Templars. He staged a meeting of church scholars in France who, no surprise, came back with the verdict that Philip was right to have the Templars arrested. Philip then organized a judicial body in Vienna to look over the case between 1309 and 1310. It was February of 1310 when 15 brothers came forward, prepared to defend the order. This number quickly swelled to something like 500 Templars, now committed to recanting their forced confessions and arguing for the order's orthodoxy. These brothers were declared relapsed heretics, and they were executed by burning at the stake. All of them loudly proclaiming their order's innocence, even while they died. People watching these executions were deeply impressed by the piety and courage of these brothers. Public opinion now swung sharply in favor of the Templars, much to Philip's ire. Despite all of Philip's pressure, the representatives of the Pope, along with other high-ranking individuals in France, continued to insist that the Templars had not been proved guilty. Impatient and angry, Philip called a council in Lyon in 1312, showing up with his army to make the point that he would not be defied in this matter. Under extreme pressure, the papal commission bent to Philip and declared, amazingly, that although the order had not been proven guilty, it had been so defamed that it must be dissolved. Philip's army would not allow anyone present at the council, including nobles and clergymen, most of whom were sympathetic to the Templars, to debate the matter further. It was declared that those Templars who confessed and renounced their order would be released and allowed to join other orders. Those who refused to recant would be tried as lapsed heretics. This is where the Templar leadership showed incredible courage. Jacques de Molay, the master of the order, and other Templar commanders, Geoffrey de Charnay, Geoffrey de Gonville, and Hugh Piron, insisted on defending the order. Under threats of violence and death, they held their ground. They were condemned to life in prison, but Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Gonville would not go quietly to their sentences. They loudly renounced the proceedings as unjust, vocally criticizing the king and his administration, as well as the Pope. On March 18th, 1314, Jacques and Geoffrey, having tested the mercy of their captors to the breaking point, were condemned to burn as heretics. It seems likely that Philip had hoped to avoid executing the elite leadership of the Templars, since he could have used the sentences of life imprisonment as propaganda, meant to portray him as a merciful ruler. But Jacques and Geoffrey would have none of it. The execution of Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Gonville was a highly charged event. Here, one of Philip's supporters records the scene, and even he can't bring himself to vilify the Templar masters. The master contradicted the cardinal, and said to him that he believed in our Lord, and that there was no more loyal and better Christian than he was. He did not know anything in the order which did not originate in good and in the Christian law. He would not abandon his order. He would suffer death there for God's sake, and for justice, and for right. No one present was so hard-hearted that they did not cross themselves many times when they heard him speak about his order like this. Seeing the fire ready, the master took off his clothes. I say what I saw. He stood there in just his shirt, happily and in good spirits. He did not tremble, no matter how they dragged and prodded at him. They took hold of him to tie him to the stake. He agreed to this, happy and rejoicing. They tied his hands with a cord, but first he said to them, "Sirs, at least let me join my hands together for a little while, and make my prayer to God. For now is the time and the season to pray. I see here my judgment, the place where I must die in a short time hence. God knows that my death is wrong and a sin. So in short time, evil things will befall those who have condemned us to death. God will avenge our death. Sirs," he said, "you should know without any argument that all those who have acted against us will suffer for what they have done to us. I wish to die in this belief. See here my faith, and I beg you to turn my face towards the Church of Our Lady, from whom our Lord was born." His request was met. He died like this, and met his death so sweetly that everyone was amazed. As Philip feared, the death of the Templar leaders became martyrdoms. Public opinion swelled in favor of the murdered Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Gonville, who became renowned everywhere. King Philip IV of France had succeeded in dissolving the Templars, but his propaganda campaign had failed utterly. Even his own chroniclers, as we have seen, recorded the executions with positive portrayal of the Templars. It's impossible not to admire the courage of these two Templar leaders, who could have ended their lives under fairly comfortable conditions in house arrest. Instead, they chose to be burned alive in defiance of the King of France. Incidentally, Jacques' prophecy at the stake proved true. That same year, Philip suffered a severe head injury during a hunting accident, which left him in agony for weeks. He finally died in incredible pain. Like so many kings, his vows to go on crusade left unfulfilled.